Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com. Wouldn't it be nice to take a spring break from some house payments? SaveWithConrad.com can show you how to skip your next 2 house payments and get a cheaper monthly payment. We routinely help our podcast listeners save $500, $600, $700, even $800 a month. And I'm talking to you if you're in a 30-year loan or if you've got credit card debt. It's not a matter of if we can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com. NMLS number 65084, equal housing lender. And oh, by the way, it's no cost, no obligation. And if I can't save you money, I won't waste your time. Even credit scores in the 500s can be approved, and we're licensed in more than 40 states. So what are you waiting for? Lower your monthly payments today at SaveWithConrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Dark Side of the Podcast. You may have been expecting a little more Grill and JR content. That's coming your way tomorrow. But today we figure, you know what? Let's make the most of our little quarantine time together. And let's talk about the best new series on professional wrestling. Of course, we're talking about Dark Side of the Ring. It airs Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern on Vice. And joining us again today to discuss the Dr. D Slap Heard Round the World episode, the creators of that show, Evan and Jason. Jason, how are you, man?
Good. How you doing?
Man, I'm excited to be here. Evan, have you gotten any sleep? It feels like every time I talk to you on Wednesday, you're dragging a little bit because of the afterglow of your baby airing.
That and all the wrestlers texting me at 4 a.m, getting their opinions in, you know.
There's a lot of times like I'll call Evan like the day after and he's like, man, I was up till like 4 a.m. talking to this wrestler. It's like, man, no sleep.
Yeah, they all take it out on me, and yeah. So I'm hanging in. I'm gonna hang in as best I can today, and give everyone, the best of what I can today. But it's gonna be a little slower than normal, I think, today.
Jason, start from the beginning. How does this subject make it to your list? Like, as a tape trader, I was first familiar with this in, I don't know, probably 1980 or 1996 or 97. And it became something that a lot of guys sort of passed around on VHS. And that's the first time I saw it. But if I'm honest, I haven't really thought about it since. But it is a fascinating story. How was this on your radar? I think I'm even a few years older than you guys.
Well, I was born in 82. So this event happened, I believe, when I was like 2 years old. So I didn't know anything about it at the time. But this is it, the clip of David Schultz slapping John Stossel, the 2020 reporter, is kind of one of the very first, I think, like viral wrestling clips. Yeah. Like even I remember even when we got our first computer and there was, like wrestling clips from years prior to myself, like watching it, like appearing online. I remember like seeing that clip and it being like almost, even from what I remember, even one of the first kind of viral clips just in general that I saw online. And it was just, it was at the time just so captivating, like to see something like that, to see something just so like raw in that way. That is, it's always stayed in my mind. And so,
it was like the Winnebago Man of wrestling clips, you know?
Yeah.
And I think the very first time I saw it, you know, again, just being the age that I am, you know, I didn't, and because, you know, David Schultz really was kind of out of the limelight by the time I was, you know, getting hip to wrestling, that like, it was kind of like, who is this guy? You know, this clip was so funny, for, you know, lack of a better word. And it's also amazing, but it was kind of like, you know, who is this guy and what's the story behind this guy? And I never really, you know, knew much about it, but I'd seen it like hundreds and hundreds of times. And then it was like, for when it came around time to discuss season 2 topics, this wasn't really something that was on, I think, our radars as a story, right, Jason? Like, this wasn't something we ever talked about as a episode.
It's like always been brought up as just one of those like pivotal like moments, you know, that people talk about, but we never really thought at first, like, is there really enough there to like tell an hour's worth of television, you know?
Yeah, and exactly. And so, and then after season 1 came out, I got contacted by 2 separate people. One is a wrestling promoter named Herb Simmons, and I was also contacted by Barbara Goodish, who is Bruiser Brody's widow, and they both told me independently that basically, you know, David Schultz is ready to tell his story now, and like is like looking for you, you know. And I was like, whoa, really? And then I was thinking like, whoa, that's interesting. And so it was really one of the first times that, you know, because now we had the season out, it was really one of the first times that like a wrestler has approached us to tell their story. And so that really was like interesting. Yeah. And then I starting to look at it, it was kind of like, well, you know, we could kind of look back at not only just that moment in time, which is amazing, but also like the context of it is key, but also like that whole 2020 expose, because it really is one of the first like national TV exposés. I believe, you know, it's one of the first like big ones on that scale. And so it was kind of like, and then you kind of look at how it comes at a very interesting time in wrestling history, you know, when the tide is about to turn, kind of going from wrestling to sports entertainment. And so it's kind of like, you know, what's the whole context of that situation? How did this piece come together? And then, of course, like, wouldn't it be fascinating if you could get John Stossel to talk about it?
So, Jason, talk me through this. How do you guys get John Stossel? Because I got to tell you, it feels like he would have been the hardest person to pin down for this story. You guys already had a relationship with Jim Cornette. You said Dr. D was looking for you, and I feel like
before that too, I also wanted to say, I just recalled too, the first time I met David Schultz was at StarCast when we premiered the Bruiser Brody episode there. And he was like really like one of the people I didn't know at the time that I wanted to like tell his story.
Right.
But I was just so intrigued because I knew he was friends with Bruiser Brody. And like Evan and I are just so captivated with meeting people who like come from that era and who like, especially the wrestlers who walked alongside like Bruiser Brody. There's just something just so fascinating about like that group of like performers at that time. So, and even when I met him at StarCast, like I was intimidated. Like I kind of paced, I think, in front of his table maybe for like 20 minutes before I like built up the courage to introduce myself. And he was nice. He was a little standoffish, but we like ended up walking down the hall and he just kind of reminisced about Brody a little bit. But I felt like comfortable enough with him that I was like, when we came up with this idea of the episode, I was like really excited and intrigued to like spend more time with him because I knew there was a lot there. I knew that there was a lot kind of hidden underneath this shell, that there was much more to this man than this like really tough exterior that he's like putting out here. But to jump forward to getting in contact with John Stossel, I do remember that being like difficult. I do remember just even like the process, like when we did get him, like our time with him was just so limited. We only had like 30 minutes.
25 minutes probably. I think it was 25 minutes. It actually was someone who doesn't get nearly enough credit for season 2, which was our series producer Alex McIntosh, who worked with us on season 2, and he did everything. He was right there on the front lines with us producing this season, and he actually. It was either he volunteered or was tasked with actually, Project John Stossel, in terms of getting him on board. And it was Alex that actually reached out to him, I think, through ABC News, or like found some way to get in touch with him and got in touch with his assistant. And then they kind of traded some emails, and then he finally got his opportunity to talk to John on the phone, and they had a conversation about it. And, it was very like, John said essentially the same stuff that he said on air, as it is like annoyingly one of the things that people always ask him about, so many years later out of all the pieces he's done. And, talking about the lawsuit and talking about the jurosomatic illness. And then he agreed to doing it, but it was basically like, I'm going to give you 25 minutes of my time. And like, which is by far and away the shortest interview that we've ever done for all of the show. But so we used pretty much almost every single bit from his interview is in the show. But we were so excited. Actually, one of the more exciting moments for me getting him on board, because I was just very exhilarated by just the thought of like intercutting, John and David in the episode, and just how that dynamic is going to play, and being able to really make that scene of like in that hallway and like everything leading up to it feel like very feel big. So that was something we were really excited about. And it kind of felt like, okay, this is really going to be cool now, because we'll be able to kind of tell a different side of the story too, which we always try and do. So it was a huge win to get John on board.
Before we talk about everything else that we saw in the episode, I feel like we should talk about the other person who we haven't mentioned, Eddie Mansfield. Jason, right or wrong, I have been sort of conditioned as a wrestling fan to hate Eddie Mansfield, just because every shoot interview I've ever seen from any wrestler ever seems to hate Eddie Mansfield. And then I finally got to see some of him last night where he's saying, "Kayfabe, how stupid is that? Who came up with that?" And, it's very sort of, I don't know, the polar opposite of what we've heard, quote unquote, old school wrestlers to think and behave like. What'd you think of Eddie Mansfield your first time you got to meet him or had an interaction with him?
Well, I actually wasn't there for this interview. It was one of the few interviews I didn't get a chance to be there for, because I was doing other parts of the show. But it like, in most cases when we do interview wrestlers, you get that side where they're defending it, and they're defending the integrity of wrestling, especially wrestlers who come from that era. So it was fascinating to hear from somebody who has like a completely opposite perspective for the most part from that we're normally used to hearing.
Yeah. And when we were putting this together, and just to back up just like a little bit, when we first talked to David, David really wanted to talk to me and to get in contact with us to actually do this episode. And David and I had a very long conversation on the phone. He was super cool, super charming, and was telling me all about his life and the basically like what he does today, which is like his whole like sleep cycle and him just like working out in these fields and building stuff, and he hasn't slowed down one bit. And then from there, it just kind of was like, okay, like he's a really compelling character for a documentary, no doubt. But it was kind of like, once we have that in place, who else are we going to get to talk about this? Obviously, John Stossel,
right.
But we are going to need other voices. And that's when it was kind of like, okay, let's try to make this episode kind of, a look back at the 2020 expose. And obviously, Eddie Mansfield plays a huge part of that. So we, because he's like the counter, he's like the counterweight to the whole thing. You know, he's the person exposing the business when you have David as the one standing up for it. And this whole story too just speaks like to our core themes of our show, which is we always look at the reality versus fiction aspect of wrestling, and this is kind of our way of covering the wrestling is fake ? Phenomenon, like, and kind of looking deep into that. And obviously we knew Jim Cornette, like this would be a great vehicle for him, because it's a subject he's very passionate about, and so we thought he would be a great historical voice for this. But Eddie Mansfield was absolutely crucial because, he's interviewed in the piece and he can talk and explain his side of the story, and the fact that he is has been this kind of lightning rod of, controversy to those in the know about his position on wrestling and his position and his motivations for what he did. So we didn't really, sometimes interviews that are the hardest to schedule, the hardest to get on board, are the ones you wouldn't necessarily expect. And this one was extremely challenging to get booked, so to speak. And again, this was somebody who we'll have on the show next week, which I'm really excited about, is Howard Sheffman, who is one of our story producers who works very closely with us. And he did basically everything you could possibly do on the Herb Abrams episode. But he also was working on this show. He was working on this episode with us, and he reached out to Eddie Mansfield first, and just and they spent like 2 hours on the phone talking, and the conversation kind of wavered back and forth between like Eddie's side of the story, like, really passionate side of the story, and also kind of like implications towards like that there would be violence towards us if we told this story, and it was like, it was like this like these kind of like threats, like, don't tell this story, like, don't mention my name, and if you do, like, or else, like, I know some people in Brooklyn, wink, wink, and stuff like that. And so it was really like, whoa. And then he basically, by the end of the conversation, was so heated about us just like, wanting to talk to him and tell the story, once and for all, that he basically declined and said, basically don't do this or else. And so then we were kind of at this like weird place, because we're like, man, are we going to have enough voices to really fill out this episode? And so then it was like, oh man, like, what are we going to do? And so we actually just like, went ahead filming it, and we were filming David and we filmed Jim and everything. And then it wasn't until a mutual friend between me and Eddie got together and started to open up conversations again. He's a guy named Stu here in Toronto, and we just kind of reconnected, reset everything, had a fresh start, took the threats away, had a fresh start, and then tried to like, okay, let's tell the story. This is the story we want to tell. And then it was kind of like trying to build that trust up again. And I have to say, like, this episode was one of the more challenging episodes to build trust with our subjects, mainly David and Eddie, because, look, I mean, this story is about the distrust of media, in a lot of ways. Like, these guys feel like they have been burned by the way they were portrayed in a piece on television. So because of that, like, it made it really challenging at every step of the way. As much as I love David and then the situation with Eddie, it was every day was like, it was hot, like we were on, and then it was like cold, we're dead, like literally for months, even up until recently, So it's been one of the more challenging episodes, just from like a personal management point of view, in terms of being able to like tell this story. I have to say, I think out of almost more than any other one. But once we got to Houston to interview Eddie, like, it was all cool, and it was a pretty wild interview. But we were super happy just to have it finally in the can, because this was a real challenge to find the right people to talk about it. And that's why and you only see 4 voices in the show, so there is a reason for that.
I'm fascinated. Why would Dr. D be difficult if he's the one who reached out to you?
Sorry, what was that?
You sort of insinuated that this was a difficult episode to put together, and it felt like it was on and it was off and it was hot and it was cold, especially when you're comparing, the situations or circumstances you had to secure Eddie, but also Dr. D. But we started this conversation by saying Dr. D reached out to us.
I know. And that was, yeah. I mean, I don't know what else to say. It started with that, and then it kind of was just, I don't know. I think maybe like the idea of it becoming real and becoming something that we're actually coming out where we're like coming out there, and here we are with cameras.
I know, yeah. And I remember he was like, before we were coming out there, it was almost like he was trying to scare us off. Like he was warning us, like, there's all these snakes out here. Like if you're coming here, you better get a snake kit. And so
he was like, bring your snake kits.
So we went and got a snake kit. We were like, we got to get this. There's a chance we're going to get bit by snakes out here.
We were really worried. The night before, I remember we were having total like anxiety attacks. Like, man, like there's going to be like, these fucking spiders and these fucking snakes out there. Yeah.
And I remember too, like, cause we were nervous, like going there for the first time. And I remember like, we got up like super early. We're like driving in the middle of nowhere, in Tennessee. And I remember like, we like rolled up on his property and like, we're just driving down all these dirt roads trying to find his place. And there's like this gate, and I think he was standing by the gate. And we got there just like, I think the clock just turned a minute over like 9 a.m. or something when we were supposed to be there. And he just like ribbed us so hard for being like 1 minute late. I think the first 10 minutes of the conversation, he was just like ribbing us so hard about that. But then quickly he warmed up to us, and we spent some time just kind of getting to know him. And then the first thing I think we shot was him taking us through the storage locker that he had on his property, which was just like a treasure trove of incredible archival video and photographs.
Incredible.
Incredible. Like I couldn't believe it. I was just like, how many other places could there be in the middle of nowhere America where there's just like a container sitting in a field somewhere filled with like priceless wrestling like artifacts and history?
Probably several. But nothing was thrown away. Like, he's one of the subjects that we've, interviewed where, not everything was kept, which is obviously for us, like amazing, to go through that and just nerd out over photos and other memorabilia and stuff. But also going there, it kind of was like, cause we actually spent we spent 2 days with him. And I kind of, it was kind of like filming the Von Erich episode a little bit, like we did in season 1, where, we're kind of on this, wrestler's compound. David kind of has built by hand his own compound, which is amazing. It's like he's built these like various structures on the property, his house, and like everything. It's really this whole thing that he has maintained and built himself. And it has this just like, it just had this really like sequestered, amazing quality to it. And it was like, I want to say it was like definitely like near, if not over 100 degrees. It was unbelievably hot. Yeah. And there was like no fans, nothing. Like it was crazy. He actually expected us to do the interview outside, was what the plan was. And we had to like basically tell him like we would die if we did the interview outside.
I already run really hot. So like, just even if I was filming outside in the winter, I'm going to be sweating. So there I'm drenched. I'm just like the whole day just soaked in water. Yeah. And he was awesome. And him and his wife were so nice. They like just kept bringing out towels and stuff for us.
It was wild. Yeah. It was wild. Yeah. And we should talk about his wife, Peggy, because she's just like amazing. And I tried really hard. I mean, talk about interview subjects for the show. I think my number one person that I wish could be in the show giving a point of view is actually David Schultz's wife, Peggy. And I tried so hard, but she was, I think, camera shy, didn't want to do it and was nervous about it. But she, her and David have been together, I think, since like he was like, I want to say like 17 or something.
It's been over 55 years. I know that. Yeah.
It's wild. And so she's been there for everything in his life. Like when he wrestled in Stampede, they like lived together in Calgary.
Like you hear those stories when he was training with Herb Welch and like he like would come home and he was so sore. Like Peggy would have to like lift him out of the truck and like bring him into the house because he was just so beaten down.
Yeah, she was there for every single aspect of his wrestling career and beyond. And she also, with all the lawsuits that, that they had to endure, which was really tough on them. That's actually one thing that David really didn't talk about that much in the interview. But, they were like facing down financial ruin with some of the lawsuits that they were engaged in with the WWE at certain points. And she was there, like, really managing that process. I think she got even named in one of the lawsuits. And then she also, when David became a bounty hunter, like, she became, like, a bail bonds person, right? Like, and
pretty much, like, yeah. Like, when you see, like, the old video, like, the bounty hunting videos that they made, like, she's the one there, like, answering the phones and taking the calls and booking the, like, figuring out where the bounties are going and sending David off to go collect the bounties.
Yeah, and like she was really involved in like I think tracking a lot of these people down and like you would actually go into like into that like storage unit thing that he has there, and you would just see like these boxes of files of like all of the like like all the bounty hunter targets, with all the photographs and like what they've been charged and what they've and it was amazing. And she was a huge part of that, and so like to spend time with her, and she was so nice.
Yeah,
and she was so cool.
She made us lunch like every day, and
apple turnovers. She made us like,
God,
don't forget about the apple turnovers.
Yeah. But that's like, it was a side like we really wish we could have shown, because honestly, it was like one of the more inspiring things I think I've ever seen. Like while making this show, it was seeing the relationship between David and his wife, and just like how they were like best friends, and like still to this day, and how they're just so close, and there was just something so romantic about it. Like, again, like that time when I saw him at StarCast and he was just like this really hard exterior, I knew there was something more to him. And then when you see him around Peggy, his heart just like opens up, and he's just like joking around with her and flirting with her. And like and just to see them together after, over 50 years of marriage, still being best friends, and they're stuck to the hip, and the love was there. And that honestly was really inspiring to see.
Yeah, it was definitely like a whole aspect of the story that like we wish like really could have come through the episode. I think it would have added a whole nother layer to David as a character. But unfortunately, as hard as I tried and as many conversations I had with her and him about it, it just was kind of a no-fly zone, unfortunately. But I knew, as much as I knew it was like in their best interest, it's also like, someone who's not comfortable being on camera, and
yeah, totally.
You're not going to force somebody to do it, but it just would have been amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure you brought it up, and Dr. Day said, "Get out of here, woman! Get in there and scrub them floors." So,
right.
Yeah, see, that's what you think. Like when you see those promos, it's just so intimidating. And yeah, that one scene he did for Vince where he's like screaming at his family and throwing them out the door, and then you just see like really like when you're with this guy, he can be really kind and romantic.
What a classic story where he had to explain, no, that wasn't my house, that wasn't my wife, those weren't my kids, that was not my gun. It was remarkable that Vince ever had to even explain that to the police. And I guess that's really one of the reasons a story like this would be picked for Dark Side of the Ring, is you guys have had a fun time sort of examining, where reality and quote unquote showmanship sort of get a little blurry. And there's maybe not a better example than this, but of course, really the genesis of what we're talking about is John Stossel getting slapped backstage. And the thing I've always wondered was, how in the world does he get backstage? And Stossel just in passing sort of says, well, Vince must have approved it. How in the world does this even happen? This doesn't feel like it should be. Like, why would Vince allow an investigative journalist backstage to Madison Square Garden?
That's a good point. I mean, as far as the story we got from the folks that we interviewed, the 4 people we interviewed, I mean, it basically, I guess he must have requested it and he got access to it. I mean, he must have maybe Vince saw it as an opportunity, to get publicity, but to do it like, because I think he's interviewed in the piece, isn't he not? I think Vince is interviewed in that piece. I know I've seen a John Stossel Vince thing, so I'm sure he probably saw it as like a publicity opportunity, and especially if he could have featured some of his his heels, kind of sticking up for the business. If that's what this was going to morph into, did he? Now the $1 million question is, did he anticipate for one of them to physically assault another? I don't know. But I think that I'm sure he was able to see that, the controversy creates cash type mentality, or that this exposure, as I'm ramping up for my WrestleMania and everything on this national platform, is at least going to be worth some eyeballs,
Well, it's just remarkable to me. And I think it adds a lot to, the story, because we're going to hear later on in the story that, when this lawsuit seemingly doesn't go away. And I think at first Vince thought, well, the heat will die down. So he sends Dr. D to Japan and they recreate this famous angle, which I think a lot of wrestling fans on Twitter last night were shocked to see. Mm-hmm. I actually knew about that though. I don't know how I knew that they recreated it, but it feels like we hear a lot of especially in that era, and obviously it's a stretch to make a comparison, but after the Brody incident, there were other promotions who wanted to run an angle about a quote unquote stabbing backstage because fans were just familiar with it. So I guess that's sort of typical promoter fare, but maybe one that a lot of folks would have assumed New Japan wouldn't have participated in, but clearly they did. But when he's sort of fading the heat, so to speak, the lawsuit doesn't go away. And eventually we see Vince ask, David, hey, go ahead and sign this document saying that it wasn't my idea and that, you're sort of holding me harmless. Mm-hmm. And that spells the end essentially of Dr. D and the WWF, because he doesn't want to sign it. And then he tells a fantastical story about, accosting Mr. T at ringside. And of course there's different versions of that story. And one even include the silly idea that he was hogtied with guns pointed to his head. It feels like a lot of the sort of fun of professional wrestling is it almost becomes like an old fishing tale. It just gets bigger as time goes on. What did you think of Dr. D's story of being escorted out of the arena?
Well, I mean, I think this episode is a really good example to kind of to use of like something that Jason and I kind of lean into when we do these episodes, which is, I know on this show that we've referenced Errol Morris's Thin Blue Line on the show before as a major influence to us as documentary filmmakers. There's another major influence, which is Werner Herzog, who's a famous, German filmmaker, and he made incredible films in the 70s and 80s, and then he kind of transitioned into becoming a documentary filmmaker. And he's always kind of been this proponent of, at the risk of me sounding pretentious right now, he's kind of always been a proponent of this idea of ecstatic truth, quote unquote, which is this idea of, not necessarily truth in documentary doesn't always have to mean facts, things that like, just are just, basic, because that can be very shallow in a documentary sometimes, where it's really the truth of the people that you're doing the story about, what their truth is, and how that evolves over time. And Werner Herzog always had the greatest kind of like the best way to explain that in like the approach in documentary filmmaking. It's kind of where the line you draw between making a documentary and then also making like, you know, a journalistic news piece, right? And his example is like in the world of literature, if facts were the most like important thing in the world, then the Manhattan phone book would be the greatest book that's ever been written, you know, because, you know, John Smith, yes, you know, he lives on 14th Street, and John Smith's, you know, phone number is this, you know, like this is all true.
Right.
But in the nature of documentary filmmaking, or in this approach to documentary filmmaking, that it's like looking at, yes, John Smith does live on this street. This is his phone number. But what does John Smith have nightmares about? You know, how fucked up was his childhood? You know, like it's kind of looking into like those aspects of truth. And I think in this episode, you see that on display in a lot of different compelling ways, which is, you know, you see kind of, you know, heightened versions of, I think, these stories. Like, you know, were there FBI agents that, like, you know, guarded Eddie Mansfield after, you know, the 2020 piece aired? You know, did David have, you know, two guns pointed to his head as he was exiting, you know, a wrestling arena with presumably fans everywhere? And, you know, was cocaine planted on like Eddie Mansfield, you know, in that? And of course, you know, Eddie Mansfield's line that lit up, you know, social media last night about, you know, comparing wrestlers to the abolishment of slavery and all that stuff is like, you know, these are the truths of these individuals in the show, you know, and that's something that's always been something that we've always tried to highlight on the show, you know, and like lean into, and especially because the nature of all these episodes deal with the blurred lines between reality and fiction, and that's like what wrestling. That's what's so interesting about wrestling as a sport. And so I think we always try and look at whether or not that's like a provable fact, like if he had guns pointed to his head, or if FBI agents were guarding Eddie Mansfield after this. It is kind of the truth of those people at that time when the interview was taking place. And so it becomes more of a compelling portrait of them as characters. So for us, it's like, I don't know, it's a long-winded way to answer your question, but it's just something I was reflecting on last night when I was watching it back again, is kind of like, you know, it is just a fascinating glimpse into who these people are, I think, you know, and whether or not I think it's like that actually happened is a little bit beside the point, because I think it reveals a lot about that person. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And, you know, I think it's interesting that wrestling, I guess, like a lot of other, you know, areas of entertainment, there's sort of two approaches to this. We give some wrestlers a little bit of latitude and say, oh, well, you know, never let the truth get in the way of a good story, which I think is a famous Dusty Rhodes line. Like, if you're going to tell a story, you know, what's wrong with adding a little spice to it? So on the one hand, when Dr. D's saying, oh, I got hogtied and hauled out at gunpoint, I'm thinking, you know what? I'm going to give him a pass. But then when Mansfield's talking about, oh, people are trying to plant cocaine on me, and I had 4 FBI agents on the plane with me, and I was just doing that whole thing just to get the boys health care. That's the reason I bladed on camera, to take care of these promoters and to encourage them to take better care of us. We needed health care and we needed a union. Fuck off. Like the Mansfield stuff just rang so hollow to me. Jason, I know you weren't there for that, but you got to see the footage. Are we on the same page here? Mansfield's full of shit.
You know, it's like, I think like, I don't know what his intentions were necessarily at the time. You know, you could definitely come away with it thinking that like he was just like pissed off at promoters and this was like an act of revenge. But I don't know, maybe over like the course of the years since, he's like changed his like kind of perspective on it, or his perspective on wrestling. I'm not completely sure really where like his heart lies in that regard, but he does bring up like some good points. It's just, you know, it's just hard to kind of weed through the rest of it in a way.
Yeah. Like, you know, there are some things that he says on the episode, which I do believe, well, I mean, they're very relevant to today. You know, they're conversations that we're having about wrestling right now in terms of healthcare and retirement and all that stuff. And there are important things to talk about, and there are some important points that he's bringing up, but like to have that thought back then, I don't know. And to me, like, this is just my personal opinion, but it's almost like, I think when he went on that TV program and he did expose the business, I'm sure, I'm just speculating here, but I mean, there was a bit like a bitterness towards the industry in terms of how he was treated by promoters, as he does explain. And I just feel like for him that the fallout of this was maybe way greater than he anticipated that it would be. And maybe there was some remorse that he had in terms of doing it. And I think maybe the only way he was able to really come to terms with it and be able to like kind of talk about it and, move on was to kind of have that narrative about it. You know what I mean? And I think maybe at his core, like, he does feel that way. I mean, he was very passionate about those issues. Like when we were doing the interview, like, that all the promos he were cutting, was essentially about that. But, it's hard to say, like, unless we could get the actual raw footage of that 2020 interview, which we tried to do, by the way. We tried to see if the actual raw footage, the unedited footage of that whole piece still exists, but it actually unfortunately doesn't. But we'll kind of never really know about that, and it's kind of one of those things where we kind of leave it also up to viewers in a lot of ways, because Eddie's explaining that his mindset was that he was being pressured to show the blade, but when you look at the footage and you see him sharing that information, it doesn't really seem like he's kind of withholding it or being pressured. He kind of seems like he's volunteering it, and to me, to my eye. So I don't know. It's just I think it's just one of those things. Like, this is over 35 years ago, and it's a long time for stories and motivations to slightly evolve. So I think it's just another one of the interesting layers of telling this story, especially since it has to do with something being real or fake.
Okay. So help me out here, Evan. You say that once upon a time, Eddie was sending you messages like, oh, I got friends in Brooklyn, but then he warms up to the idea of doing the interview. But then you say later, it was on, it was off. Talk to us about working with Eddie Mansfield before the shoot, during the shoot, after the shoot.
Well, before the shoot, I mean, like I said earlier, like, there was a time where he just was he was a no-go. Like, we weren't going to be able to get him, which I was really bummed out about, because like it obviously it feels like it needs him, because he's a crucial subject of that 2020 story.
Of course. And
we wanted our story to be about the 2020 piece. And so obviously, he really seemed like he didn't want the story to be told. I mean, if he's telling me that there's goons in Brooklyn that are going to be sent after me. And I remember when we did the Jim Cornette thing, when we went to his house and we interviewed him for this episode, that was around the time when we thought that Eddie Mansfield was a no-go for the episode. And so Jim's doing his interview, and Jim, on some episodes, Jim is a subject, he's part of the story. And then in other episodes, Jim kind of is your wrestling historian voice, for the episode. And this, he was perfect for. I know I'm switching gears a little bit to Jim, but I'll come back to Eddie in a second. But Jim, he kind of put this whole thing into perspective, and to show that, wrestling historically, all the different exposés that have been done about wrestling over the years, have always led to, have always led to it hurting the business financially. For an example, I think there was I think it was the New York Times, back in the 30s, did a whole newspaper expose about how wrestling is fixed and all this stuff. And then it actually led to wrestling not really running in Madison Square Garden for 15 years, until the Gorgeous George era and everything like that. So there was always this direct correlation to exposing the business equals that this hurts the business financially. And so, and, Jim is just, such a wealth of knowledge in this whole area of wrestling history that we obviously want to include him. But it was really funny because when he sat down to do the interview, we were basically like, we got to the Eddie Mansfield part of the story and was like, and I think I just casually mentioned, I was like, yeah, like, unfortunately, like, Eddie's not going to be involved in the piece. And, he said, like, he's got some people in Brooklyn that are going to be coming for us, and he was like, what? And I just told him the story of like, yeah, he told us not to tell this story and to look the other way and all this stuff. And then Jim cut and this takes in a lot of territory here, but the most incendiary promo I've maybe heard Jim ever cut on Eddie Mansfield. And it's really entertaining, but we couldn't quite use it in the episode because it's like, he's your historical voice. He's like your like secondary narrator. It's like you can't have like in your documentary like Richard Attenborough or like Leonardo DiCaprio basically being like, you motherfucker, I'm gonna bring you out into the fucking middle of the street and shoot off your goddamn kneecaps, or whatever. Like, how dare you, like, threaten these fine producers of this program, And it was amazing. It's one of the more mental amazing Jim Cornette promos. Maybe it'll get out there someday.
Somewhere you gotta tweet that when the season's over. Come on.
I think there might be a deleted scene of it, actually, isn't there?
I can't remember.
I think there might be, and it's epic. It's really epic. And he says, but it was cool because he kind of stood up for us and he's like, you threatened the producers of this fine program, and he cuts this promo. It's epic. And then once we had once conversations between us and Eddie resurfaced, because we had this conduit, we had our friend Stu, and we kind of, he was our mediator, I guess you could say, in order to get him back on board for this episode. The Jim Cornette promo, or the threat of the Jim Cornette promo, was a somewhat of a factor, I think, in Eddie wanting to participate, thinking that, okay, well, there's this epic promo that's going to be cut, I better fire back. And so he did, and he has a whole promo he cut about Jim Cornette. And so then there were early cuts of this episode that were basically just like all four of these guys just fucking cutting promos on each other, like nonstop. Like you have John Stossel saying "fuck you, David," which is amazing, and then you have David talking about Eddie, and then Jim talking about Eddie, and then Eddie talking about Jim, and Eddie talking about David, talking about Stossel, and it was just like this crossfire thing that was like interesting, but then again, it's like how much you got to tell the story too. And again, because Jim is kind of in that narrator position in this, or more in the historical voice in this position, it kind of felt weird for someone who's not really involved in the story just to start cutting promos on the people who are part of the show. But it is entertaining. But so then, yeah, once we got to Houston, and once we kind of, once the situation cooled down, like he was cool, and his. And doing the interview with him was fine. And he also brought the grappler with him as well, Len Denton, right? He brought the grappler with him and was like, "You guys should interview the grappler." And I was just like, "Whoa, I didn't know I was going to be interviewing the grappler today," And it was kind of being blindsided with this whole thing. And I felt bad because it's like, he's not really part of this story, and I don't want to waste his time and everything. So it was a little bit of a crazy day, but his interview, as far as an engaging, passionate interview goes, I mean, I was very happy with it. I was very happy with his interview. And once that was all said and done, it was good. But then, after when we wrapped production, there was just kind of between David and between Eddie, there was just a lot of uncertainty about what this piece was going to be like. And so I think that they kind of, both of them, and respectfully, were just kind of getting anxious about it. And, it takes time to edit these things, and, it doesn't happen overnight. And I think that, I just had to field kind of a lot of quelling of anxieties for several months, all the way up until last night, and probably now and through until today, just in terms of the whole thing. Because, again, like I was saying, this story has so much to do with, the media and the distrust of how their careers have been portrayed. And I don't know how David feels about the episode, and I hope that David likes it. I hope that he likes it. I haven't heard from him yet, but I hope that he dug it.
Well, he's probably coming to look for you. The footage we saw of him as a bounty hunter, especially the stuff that you guys teased on Twitter that felt like it was from a Japanese home video or something like that. It was just tremendous. How much fun was it, Jason, to explore the sort of bounty hunter version of Dr. D's persona?
That was a really cool aspect of his life that I didn't really know too much about, other than just seeing the odd clip that I could find on YouTube. But then when we went through his storage locker, he just had so many more tapes from his bounty hunting days. But that, to me, in some ways, was just, it was like almost even more fascinating, if you could say, than the wrestling stuff, because he has so many intense bounty hunting stories. And he told us a few of them, and, it would have been great. Like, we could do a whole episode just about his bounty hunting exploits, but we highlighted one of them that is like a story he gets into even more detail in his book. But that bounty hunting story of how he tracked down this guy who had kidnapped 2 young girls and had them in captivity for I think it was over 2 years, and the FBI tried to take this guy down and rescue them, but they couldn't find him, and so they got Dr. D on it, and he was able to track them down. And his first, we didn't put this in the episode, but the first time he found the guy, he just told the FBI as to where this guy's whereabouts were, and the FBI screwed it up, and this guy got wind that they were on his tail, and so they took off. I believe they took off. Yeah, it was down to Puerto Rico. And so then David decided he would go down there himself, and he tracked the guy down, found him in a bar, and took him in and took these 2 girls in, and they had a baby and 2 I think guard dogs with them as well too. And
he's a crazy scene.
Yeah, he talked about how he brought them back to where the girls were from, and he hand delivered the 2 girls to their parents. And to this day, he still keeps in touch with them. And but it was just a remarkable, crazy story.
Fearless. He's so fearless.
So fearless. When you hear about him being bounty hunting in the Bronx in the mid 80s, just being there by himself at 2 a.m. is just so intense. But I can't imagine being somebody opening their door and seeing David Schultz standing there looking for you. Maybe of all the subjects we interviewed, he'd probably be the one I'd be least surprised if I heard a knock on my door and I opened it and I saw David.
Yes, that's why I won't be sleeping tonight either, the next couple of weeks. But I have to just point out that I just love that one clip of the guy in the whole bounty hunter section of the episode, where that one guy's he must be snorting speed, and he's like, "Oh, that's the one that beat the shit out of Geraldo Rivera." Yeah, or whatever, what he's talking about.
Yeah, he's a fan of Dr. D.
Yeah. I feel good going there with you. Yeah, it's Jesus Christ.
It's tremendous. One of the things that did jump out is, in wrestling, it's almost one of those deals where no matter what, you never talk about money. And John Stossel just comes out with it. Yeah, I was hurting, and then I got $280,000, and I started to feel a little better.
Yeah, and the jurosomatic illness,
sure,
is an interesting thing, because I think he comes off, very heelish, in that section, but he was explaining in his interview that he actually believes that is an actual phenomenon. I'm just explaining how he feels about it.
Yeah, he's done a piece about it too.
Yeah, where he actually feels he was holding on to his anger and holding on to his pain over this thing. And when that doctor told him that you have a jurosomatic illness, he was basically like, fuck you, but then like he said when he did get paid, then it started to actually let it go and his pain finally subsided. And, he believes that as like a scientific phenomenon. That's what he was explaining to us.
No, I get it. It's just hysterical to me because it's almost like, I'm going to spike the ball on you, but then later he's like, oh shit, maybe there's something to it. But the number 280 really jumped out because we never hear things like that. And then you guys, of course, examined other similarities, with the whole Richard Belzer incident. I mean, I was low-key expecting you to bring up the whole Vader thing, but that probably would have been way too difficult to explain. But over the years, a lot of guys have sort of jumped to the defense. And I thought maybe the line of the episode, besides the go home line, is from Jim Cornette, where he says, man, Hulk Hogan could have shot Richard Belzer in the head and he wasn't getting fired. Just tremendous.
So good.
When you guys are sort of putting this story together, I'm sure you felt like, hey, we need to sort of stitch this stuff together and show that this wasn't a one-off thing. Other stuff like this happened. And then eventually we realized maybe it was all for naught because to avoid some taxes, Vince sort of did the same thing. And man, you want to talk about silly, seeing the Undertaker in full quote unquote gimmick standing next to the governor of New Jersey. My gosh, that stands out. Does it not?
I know. I want that action figure play set of like the Undertaker at like the New Jersey State Athletic Commission play set. No. Yeah.
And there's been like more clips that I didn't even know about that have come out since we started teasing this episode. There was a couple others.
Yeah.
Like I had.
Oh yeah. The one of Buddy
Buddy Roberts figure 4. Yeah.
Have you seen that one before, Conrad?
I have. He really applies the figure 4 like.
Yeah. That was almost more scary than the slap, I thought.
It is scary, yeah.
Yeah.
He's like, "Come on,"
It's just like being in the grips of a wrestler like that, and you're screaming like, "No!" and there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun like the other day on social media, just kind of sharing all the great moments of wrestler on journalist violence, and it's interesting, just like. And also, Cornette explains that the whole move that Hogan had on Belzer was kind of this old trick, that they would do to like skeptics, that was something that they would do. And you even see it. And there's also another one. I don't know who the TV host is, but one of the Fabs puts on a headlock or a sleeper on some other TV host that is skeptical about wrestling. And so it was fun to kind of share the greatest hits of that the other day on social media. But the Belzer one is very on topic because because it happened so soon after the Stossel one, and it involves Hogan, who's part of this story in some ways. And and that's way more violent. I mean, he cracked his head open, and actually, if you go on YouTube and you just search for it, you search for the Hogan Belzer thing, you'll see like a segment with him talking about it like after the fact. Like he plays the clip back, and then he actually turns around and like shows you like the stitches like in his head from like where his head busted open. And like it's pretty crazy, it's pretty crazy. I mean, it's hard to imagine this stuff happening just in what we know now and lawsuits and everything, and just how the industry has changed. This episode really sticks out in a way of like, man, the industry has changed, hasn't it?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm glad you said that. And we would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about Hulk Hogan, because I got to tell you, one of my favorite things of this episode is Dr. D wanting to feel like, he properly conveys to the audience, hey, Hulk Hogan is nothing special. When I met him, he didn't have nothing. He was living in his van. He used to sleep at my house. You can tell it's coming from a bitter place of, hey, I felt like this guy was my friend. And he even examined that in the story where he admits, yeah, he's probably one of the better friends I ever had until he turned his back on me. But when he did, it's like Dr. D just switched it off, man. And I love when you guys are in his storage facility and he's flipping through pictures. And I think we hear Jason say, hey, what's on the back of that photo? And he turns it around and, old friend forgot his name. Just fucking remarkable, because it's done with a wink and a smile, but there is some real bitterness in Dr. D towards his old pal Terry about how all of this came together. And Jason, I think maybe you were the person who zeroed in on that first, at least from what we saw on camera. What can you tell us about the Hogan relationship, Jason?
Well, it was very apparent, like right off the top. Like I said, when we first landed at his place, the first thing we did was set up the cameras and we started filming in that storage locker. And so, he started going through those photos, and every time like Hogan would come up, he would just like start ribbing him. And it was like the whole time we were there, if he came up, you just like, but it was kind of like, it wasn't done in any kind of like, I don't know. There wasn't like, I didn't feel any like real
malice.
Malice or venom. I could sense that. Like, I bet these guys could get together and patch things up, that they were old buddies. And I bet I don't know, maybe that could like happen again or I don't know. But I just got a sense it was just like, he just kept ribbing him like you would rib like an old friend kind of, I don't know, that you had like some problems with. But I don't know. It was really interesting. Like that energy was there and it was very palpable, but it was just, I don't know. It was funny. There was something charming about it.
Evan, you've always been sort of shoot for the moon, and if you miss, whatever, maybe you land amongst the stars. Is Hogan one of the stars you're aiming for this show? Because it feels like he would have been a suitable person to talk to about all of this.
Oh man. I would love to have had Hogan's perspective on this whole story. I mean, obviously we included that little bit of when he commented on the Mr. T situation on Steve Austin's podcast. But to be able to have Hogan's side of the story would definitely be interesting, especially in the hopes of like what Jason was saying, in order to patch things up. I would have loved to have helped to facilitate that. Because, you can tell, that they like, just from also reading Dr. D's book too, which I highly recommend.
Hey, let's plug that right fast. Don't Call Me Fake, the real story of Dr. D, David Schultz. It came out last year. It's available absolutely anywhere you enjoy books. Amazon.com has it, anywhere else. But the name of the book, which everyone, myself included, recommends, it's Don't Call Me Fake, the real story of Dr. D, David Schultz. So just wanted to mention, it's a big time book. Bret Hart does the foreword. It's a pretty special look at one of the more unique characters in the history of wrestling. And the back cover is worth it just for the photo of him pointing a pistol right at your face. So check it out. Don't Call Me Fake.
Totally. But it's really apparent from that book, just like the relationship that they had as friends, especially David knowing him, when he was a bass player in a bar band, and so that was really interesting. So I think to be able to go back all the way, to pre-Hulkamania, and to be able to tell that whole side of their story, because I mean those guys were such rivals in the AWA, something that we didn't really get a lot of runtime to really get into, and that would have been great. But
some of those matches are good too. Actually.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we did contact someone who's very close to Hulk, and basically pitched the idea, like, let me take your temperature on this. What do you think the likelihood is of Hogan participating in a Dr. D documentary? And I was basically told like there was no chance in hell, so I didn't really pursue it beyond that. And obviously, we had our little Hogan drama last season, and that also, we would have liked to have patched that up as well, because we really do want him on the show. I mean, how can you do a show about this world and not have him on it? And so yeah, it's just one of those things. I mean, this episode was a hard one to cast. I mean, because we also talked to a lot of wrestlers who were there the night of the infamous slap, and a lot of them are no longer with us. We talked to the Iron Sheik as maybe like, should we get the Iron Sheik in this episode, because he was supposedly in the hallway, and obviously Mr. Fuji's no longer with us. He would have been great for the series as a broadly, and that whole thing. So it was really tough to find like who were the voices that really could tell the story. And one of them, which we literally put an APB out for, was someone we actually could not zero at all, was Mr. T. like impossible. We did like a where in the world is Carmen Sandiego on Mr. T, and we could not find him. Like it was, remember that, Jason? Like,
yeah. He was wanting to, there's a few people we really regret not getting for the season, and that's, Mr. T is near the top of that list. But yeah, just we tried everything.
Evan, did you text me for Mr. T's number? Because I can get that.
Well, I think it was like, I don't remember if I did, but like we got all the agent's info. We called him at the church he works at. Like we tried like everything. I don't even know if that would have worked, like just to get a call back. So I don't know. Maybe I messed up and I should ask you for it. But like, yeah, like we really tried to get him. Like that was something we were like, what's the Mr. T update, this week, everybody,
Well, I mean, listen, if you found where he works and he talked to his agent, the reality is he didn't want to do it. Right. I mean, that's all there is to it.
I refuse to believe that.
Well, listen, this was, I
gotta say too, I was just going to say, like, I've heard they're going to do that, like Hogan movie, like a biopic movie.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just like, how, like they gotta have David Schultz's character in that. Like, can you imagine?
Oh my God. Yeah. One of the reenactment shots makes me chuckle is the shot of Hogan on David Schultz's couch. That might be one of the more funny moments on set for me, for sure.
The thing that really stuck out to me, when we're talking about things we sort of didn't know going into this, is the idea that the same night that Dr. D slaps Stossel, he wrestles Antonio Inoki in Madison Square Garden. Are you kidding me?
I know. Yeah, times have changed a little bit. I just love that. Like, I'm just going to slap John Stossel and I'm going out to wrestle Inoki.
Yeah, I actually just watched that match again this morning. Just because I was like, I want to know. I forgot like what his demeanor is like when he walks into the ring, because it's like right at minutes after, and he's just walking in there just so confident. It's just like any other day, It like seems like nothing had fazed him.
Oh, one thing we should talk about, actually. Hold the phone. I just remember this. Is in the actual footage that we got, David actually had, probably, I'm guessing from the lawsuit, but he actually had an extended version of the slap scene. So I think we still have it in the cut, right at the end where you see Vince come out.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
That's not in the 2020 broadcast, where you see Vince come out and him being like, David, David, what the hell is the matter with you? Like that was in this, like, I'm assuming that was like evidence in the in the lawsuit, but that was kind of a cool little relic that we had discovered and come across, that whole little extra bit of footage of him coming out to reprimand David, and then you kind of see David's like you see the anger in his eyes, and you see him like, and he like cusses out John Stossel, and then he kind of does a double take and starts turning back the other way. It's pretty amazing to see.
I got to tell you, man, I've probably seen that clip, as I said, as a tape trader so many times, in the mid to late 90s, but it wasn't until I watched it back on you guys' show that I saw Mr. Fuji hanging out in the background. And the thing that made me laugh a little bit is we've heard Bruce Pritchard talk about what a notorious ribber Fuji was, but every now and again, to really rib guys who were sensitive and nervous about a Fuji rib, he wouldn't rib them at all. And when Bruce asked him about it, he says, best rib, no rib.
My favorite.
Incredible. And what a line that is, because you just wonder, like, what's going through Fuji's mind as he sees, okay, here's an investigative reporter here to shut us down. Oh, and wow, one of the boys really just slapped the shit out of him. Best rib, no rib.
If you actually study the footage, if you go like frame by frame, like he pretty much no-sells the slap.
Yeah.
Like he's just chilling back there, like, like probably plotting his next rib.
Well, what's fascinating too is, there's lots of theories about sort of the dark side of professional wrestling, pardon the pun. And a lot of guys think that Fuji once upon a time was one of the fixers for the WWF. And so if there was a situation that was going bad that, maybe they needed to protect the business or protect the company, Fuji may or may not have been involved in that, whatever that may mean. And the idea that he's just in the doorway watching this all happen just really stuck out. A, because of the funny joking nature we've heard of Mr. Fuji. But then when you hear, well, once upon a time, he may have been like a fixer or a cleaner for the company, and he's just here, just checking it out and watching it all happen. One of the biggest moments in wrestling history, the slap heard round the world. And what a way this episode ended, with Stossel. It's funny because Evan, when you sent me a link for this, I don't know, a week or two ago to sort of preview it, the first thing you always want me to give you my feedback right after. The first thing I text you after was, "Fuck you, David." How remarkable of an ending is that? I mean, when he hits that line, you guys have to know, like, oh, that's the fucking go home closing line right there.
That was his go home line in the interview. He was like, "Fuck you, David. All right, guys, see you later." Like literally, like it was amazing. Cause I didn't anticipate him to like have necessarily like, one thing I should mention is that David was really keen on wanting to get in the same room with John Stossel again.
Oh, wow.
Like, I can't believe I forgot about this until this moment right now. But basically, he really wanted me to try and orchestrate them sitting down together again. And that was what like the original idea was to actually like, build to to have the finish be them like, coming together again. Right. Which would have been amazing. But for John, there was no interest in that essentially, but David had a lot of interest in it. And I think maybe for some to bury the hatchet, to have some closure, because he doesn't necessarily, he does put a lot of his anger in this whole situation more towards Vince than he does towards John. Like I think that the John aspect of it as well, he's this kind of a guy, but whatever. But so I think he because that's why he says in the episode when David's like, "I'm not going to hit you, boy," or whatever he says, like he always wanted to get face to face with him again. I think he even tried over the years to make it happen, but John was never really into it. And so I was just surprised that John had that kind of venom for David still, because obviously, John is the one that really made out like a bandit in this situation, right? Like, I mean, he gets the 280,000, so I thought, it's kind of, I don't know. It seems like weird to kind of hold on to that still, but I guess it kind of gives you a view into, how much this, I guess, affected him in some ways, so, and how much it maybe still either humiliates him or still, causes him, because he does say in the episode, it's so annoying that it's one of my top clips, so maybe there is some heavy resentment there. But when he said that line in the interview, it was hard not to just pop completely, which it happens from time to time on the show, but was like, yeah, definitely going to be the go home line. There was no question about it.
I would still love to see that though. Like Conrad, I don't know if there's any way you could do that for a future StarCast.
Oh my God.
That would be a big deal.
Oh my God. Can we please?
Well, here's the trouble with that. Stossel seems like a shithead. Does he not?
Well, I mean, no, I mean, I don't know.
He's so flippant. Like, yeah, I liked it as a kid, but it's phony. It's silly. It's stupid. And then later, after he's sort of shit all over something that we all really like, he referred to the piece that he did, as you've said a few times here, as annoying. Like, oh, it's annoying that they remember it. Well, what the fuck else are you known for? Like, you did this story and it was memorable and you got 280 G's for it. Now you're like, oh, it's so annoying that that's what I'm remembered for. Like, he has such a disdain for wrestling. I don't know that I would even want to do anything with him.
I think that would be fun heat for an audience that's done sarcasm.
I think, well, what I was going to say is that maybe now that the pieces come out and that John Stossel was actually trending on Twitter last night, which I couldn't believe.
Right.
But yeah, maybe now there's like the rebuttal. I mean, I'm sure all of these guys, I'm sure there's some things that David probably wanted in this episode that didn't make it in that I'll get texted about at 4 a.m. And I'm sure that I already know Eddie Mansfield, there's some things that he wanted to have in the episode that he texted me at 4 a.m. And so maybe all of that, there can be the whole sequel to this, but it'll be live in color and, in front of everybody.
Be incredible.
Yeah.
One last thing before we wrap things up here. Is the most tone-deaf, stupid thing you've heard in the history of Dark Side of the Ring not Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, but he forgot to free the wrestlers. That is the most cringeworthy shit I have ever heard, and I'm from Alabama. How in the world does Eddie Mansfield let some shit like that fall out of his mouth and not realize, oh no.
It's something I guess he even says in the piece that it's something that he says. It's like something that it's his catchphrase. Saying.
He uses it on shoot interviews, and it just goes to show you what a fucking idiot Eddie Mansfield is. Am I wrong here, Evan?
Have you heard him say that before?
Yeah.
Somewhere?
Yeah.
Oh, you have?
Fire up YouTube. He says it on shoot interviews with RF Video and other folks. And he just thinks he's the smartest guy in the room, and he's a goddamn dumbass.
Oh, I didn't know that he's used that before. Yeah, like I was saying, going back to talking about German filmmakers and Ecstatic Truth, it's definitely part of his mindset and the way that he looks at this. That's for sure.
And there's a good quote actually from Herzog. He's like really well known as being a wrestling fan, but he's once quoted as saying, like, someone asked him why he likes wrestling, and he said, "My answer is the poet must not avert his eyes from what's going on in the world. In order to understand what's going on, you have to face it." And so he talks a lot about how you can learn things from the world and people's perspectives through watching wrestling. And if you want to better understand the world, wrestling can help you do that.
I guess so.
Well, I feel sorry for the wrestlers who weren't freed, I guess. What the fuck?
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's not.
Well, listen, next advisable. Week, is there anything else we need to touch on here? Because I'm excited to talk about next week's episode.
Oh, me too. I don't think so. I have everything crossed off my list here. I mean, this was, the last thing I want to say about this episode is, this episode is a little bit of a departure for us. Normally we're looking at these just, these horrifying tragedies in this industry or some of the darkest stories. And it was really for us to kind of be able to do something a little different and kind of, it was a good challenge to basically take a story, where we're really talking about 20 seconds of time, like a 20-second moment in time, when these two slaps occurred, and can we build a whole episode out of it? And so I actually really liked the challenge of putting this together and having it be more of a quote unquote fun episode, to where there is some humor in it. But at the same time that there are, stakes to the story, and, all of this was very real for David, and, he definitely did lose his career, but thankfully, he really came into his own and got into probably the perfect business for someone like him, which is bounty hunting. So, but this whole thing was a really fun process to make this episode, even though there was a lot of politicking back and forth, uncertainty, and being worked and all around and stuff. It was a cool departure for us to do an episode like this, I have to say.
Well, next week is going to be something that I feel like a lot of wrestling fans are going to learn for the very first time. Way before there was a StarCast, there was a guy named John Arezzi who didn't have a podcast, but he had a hot wrestling radio show in the New York market, and he decided to parlay that into a massive wrestling convention, maybe the first of its kind. It was a who's who attended, including Ric Flair and Paul Lee, and famously Herb Abrams, who decides that he wants to announce a super promotion where his booker will be Blackjack Mulligan, who happens to be in prison. And one of his key stars will be Bruiser Brody, who is dead. And yet somehow he managed to finagle quite the little upstart with syndicated television all over the country and major figures participating. And we examine next week the good, the bad, and the ugly, how it went sideways. And let me give you a bit of a spoiler. Dave Meltzer called BS on this guy very quickly in the Observer, and kept poking and prodding at Herb until eventually there's an enhancement talent match that happens on one of these shows. And Dr. Death squashes a guy named Little Davy Meltzer. And then at the end of the match, stuck a sheet in his mouth and covered him with a bag of dirt. Get it? Dirt sheet. Mm-hmm. This crazy person was at least at one moment thought to be an influential person in wrestling. and we examine how crazy it was. And by the way, what we've just talked about does not even scratch the surface. Is that fair to say, Evan?
Yeah, I am very excited to unveil this episode next week. It's been a whole, making this episode has been a complete full-on discovery for both Jason and I. This story was not something that we were super hip to when we started making it. It was something that we're going into these interviews and just genuinely, because most of the interviews you do, you're pretty prepared and you know the story, you know the kind of where you want it to go and how the story you're kind of wanting to tell. But for this, it was literally just like all the interviews we did, I was being blown away. And the cast of characters that we have for this episode. You mentioned John Arezzi is an amazing guy, incredible guy. Yeah. He's one of my favorite interviews in the piece, actually. And then Mick Foley, comes back to Dark Side of the Ring because he really cut his teeth in Herb Abrams' UWF, and he's incredible in the episode as well. He definitely has some amazing stuff in it. And yeah, this is like the way that I've been kind of describing this episode to people. And forgive me if this sounds too like industry, but I've been kind of describing it as Boogie Nights meets the Fire Festival of Wrestling.
Oh, wow.
In terms of a way to kind of describe just what's in store for next week. In terms of this is the very minimal rise and epic downfall of this wrestling organization that tried to basically do kind of what WCW would eventually do, right? Is put together a roster of former WWE talent and really try to compete, go head to head with a TV deal. Except for, this is on a way lower scale than that, but it unfortunately failed pretty miserably. And it was all kind of the creation and the dream and the motivation of a man named Herb Abrams, who is this enigmatic, charismatic, definitely individual in cowboy boots who essentially got everyone to believe in his vision. It's just that the vision didn't quite get executed, is one way to put it. And then you won't believe the last 10 minutes of the episode.
Yeah, it was a dream that became a nightmare very quickly.
It's remarkable. You've got to go out of your way to see it. I learned so much. I have a new Holy Grail belt I need to find. And
yes, I say it is the coolest wrestling belt. I should rephrase that. It's a very unique wrestling belt.
No, fuck. I think it's the coolest wrestling belt.
It's tremendous.
It is really cool. It's so, yeah.
Especially when you understand the backstory. Like when you just see the belt for what it is, you're like, oh my God, look at this. But then you hear the story and you're like, okay, that's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's actually one of the moments in the episode where you're like, all right, Herb's got a good sense of humor. Herb's all right.
Well, and the line of the series comes from Mick Foley at the very end. I feel like you guys you're on to something now. This great line from John Stossel in this week's episode and the tremendous home run line from Mick Foley next week. Just fantastic. Can't recommend it enough. So excited for everybody to see this. We'll be back next Wednesday to break it down. Of course, you need to join in the conversation. Use hashtag Dark Side of the Ring. And of course, be sure to catch the Abrams episode next Tuesday night, 10 p.m. Eastern on Vice. I have DirecTV. It's channel 271 for me. And I guess we should mention you guys have a lot of different social media platforms that we could plug and let people see some more behind the scenes content. Evan, give them those handles.
Yeah. You can follow us at Dark Side of Ring on Twitter and at Dark on Instagram. I'm at Evan Husney on Twitter and Instagram, and Jason is at Jason. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'll jump in.
No, you tell him.
Jason Eisener at Twitter and Instagram.
There you go.
I am at Hey, it's Conrad, and we are out of time. We'll see you tomorrow for another episode of Grillin' JR, and next Wednesday for another Dark Side of the Podcast. I've been telling you for a long time that SaveWithConrad.com can save you money, but don't take my word for it.
Now, James, what made you come to Save with Conrad in the first place? I needed a refi. I've been listening to Conrad's show for a couple of years. It was very, it was very competitive with what I was seeing locally and with my current lender. So I just decided to throw my business at Conrad.
Was there anything specific that Conrad said on the shows that kind of made you take that first step?
Interest rates are historically low, and 2 months without a mortgage payment seemed a really good deal.
Off the top of your head, how much money were you able to save through Save with Conrad?
Man, I don't know what the overall savings is going to be. I needed to cash out to cover some other outstanding debts, and the rate I was able to drop the rate down by almost a point, and basically keep my same payment but cash out enough to cover those outstanding debts and have a little left over for a rainy day.
Oh, that's great.
It's pouring down rain here.
Would you recommend Save with Conrad to any of your friends or family?
Oh, sure.
So what are you waiting for? Find out how much money you can save right now for free. You don't need perfect credit or money out of your pocket. Even credit scores in the 500s can be approved. And if we can't save you money, we won't waste your time. But because we're licensed in more than 40 states, we can help more families than ever before. Find out how much money you can save right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com. Oh, and did I mention you could skip your next 2 house payments? Hurry to SaveWithConrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.